Okay. O tēnā koutou katoa, e tukuna mai he klake mo tātou. E pāte matua, ko koe tēnei, e hakatahangia he tātou I te tohutohi o ngā whakaaro, hira nei, I komiri mai ngā ahua pai mō tō tātou kaupapa. Nō reira, tukuna mai tō mātaki tanga ki rungi a tātou, I roto I te ingoa hiukarati tō tātou ariki. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ernest. Kia ora koutou, everybody, and welcome to the last of this Wānanga series for continuous cover forestry business models for Aotearoa. My name is Ian Short. I'm from The Connective, one of the partners. And Ernest has very kindly just opened us with the opening karakia. So the agenda for today is two items, but then really facilitated discussion as a wrap up to this series. So the first agenda item is a run through for where the project, with this project, the CCF Business Models Project, where we've got to date, which includes the Wānanga. Then the second agenda item then is, okay, where are we now and what's coming next? Because this isn't just an opportunity to chat with friends on an interesting subject. This is, part of a journey that we're looking to accelerate over time. And then we're having 45 minutes to have what we're calling facilitated group discussion. So there will be two parts to that. We'll have 15 minutes to have a Q&A based on the presentations. And then we'll have two breakout sessions really focusing on, the core elements of what this project's about. We'll come on to that in a minute. So it will be active. People will be put into smaller teams and then coming to feedback. So, and this is all part of the project and part of this Wānanga series, and we'll touch on that soon. Okay, and as it says there at the bottom, just to help make sure that things are done, or we've got time for the right things and do things at the right time. It'd be great that if anyone's got a question, I think the best thing to do is to put it in the chat function. So my colleague Lucy Greenwood next to me here will be taking note of any questions or comments that are coming up, and that'll feed into the Q&A directly afterwards. And then when we're in the talking mode, then use the hands up icon. Thank you. Okay, so Lucy and I are going to give you a quick run through in terms of where we are to date with this project. Just as a recap, as we look at the forestry and wood processing ITP, the vision is for Aotearoa, New Zealand to be a global leader in the use of forests. Local communities are empowered through meaningful employment. The sector and our forests are resilient and diverse, and wood underpins our low emissions future. And so within the ITP, Action 7.2 is promote continuous cover forestry. And there are three parts to that. The first one is raising awareness of benefits. The second one, which is what this project is focused on, is providing business cases for CCF. And the third is supporting CCF trials. So while we are the number two there, we're also through this project supporting number one and number three. Okay, so what are we looking to achieve? So the vision there, forestry is nature and place-based, multi-use and regenerative. But I don't think we've actually covered before what this project is delivering at the high level and the three activities, and because this is what we really want to be focused on today. So the high-level deliverables, there are three. The first one is to identify priority CCF business models for Aotearoa New Zealand to pursue. The second one is to identify the systems barriers and enablers, things that need to be addressed to support the replication and scaling of CCF and Aotearoa. And the third one is to support a diverse stakeholder network, which I think the team's done a pretty awesome job through this Wānanga series so far. It's been, very active. People have been contributing and connecting, and good things coming from it. So if they're the three deliverables, the three activities that we have, the first one is desktop research, and that's looking at two different things. One is close to nature or CCF approaches that are relevant to New Zealand. The second focus on the desktop research are the business models, what business models are currently used in New Zealand and what's used internationally that could be of relevance here. The second activity is this Wānanga series of 7 engagements and discussions. And as it says there, it's to support engagement and support of stakeholders as the people are on this call today. And the third activity is the systems understanding piece that feeds into the understanding of, what are the interventions, what are the areas of focus that are needed to enable CCF to become the norm or a norm in Aotearoa. Okay, quick recap of the previous 5 wānanga. The first one, the opening session, was setting the scene for transforming forestry in Aotearoa. Focus there on collective and coherent action being required from all parts of the system, and existing division between conservation and business and forestry, with CCF as an opportunity to integrate. Wānanga 2 looked at the historical and contemporary context influences on continuous cover forestry. We had a discussion on why 262 and an opportunity for Māori to shape forestry through Indigenous lens. And that Indigenous lens provides a great framing for those in the West or Western approaches to CCF as well. Forestry is a massive climate opportunity, both in terms of resilience and mitigation, and just highlighting that continuous cover forestry is not new to Aotearoa. Wānanga 3, we looked there at international practice models and really learning many things. And I personally, my background is more on the business model side than the forestry side, and I found all of these wānanga, but particularly the international ones, were to really understand what journey they'd been on and how things had landed. And so in Wānanga 3, one of the big things that came out was that CCF is increasingly seen as a critical model that supports value creation well beyond our I guess, the standard economic focus. And it also highlighted that financially supported, it is financially supported by high value timber outputs or products, so less quantity, more quality. And then Wānanga 4, international wider systems enablers for continuous cover. A number of really interesting things there, where we had some colleagues from Ireland and from New England. I'm going to start at the bottom one, because that was the big one that hit with me, was particularly in Ireland, it was people power that really, forced through CCF, continuous cover forestry, being a priority across society, for government, for industry, and for society. They talked about the transition being challenging, but it can be achieved in a relatively short time frame. But clearly government support is pivotal. And then last week, Wānanga 5, we looked at enabling continuous cover forestry through innovation and excellence in Aotearoa. And that, I thought, was a great discussion on the back of the previous one in particular. The battle for hearts and minds. So it's not enough just to be able to say, hey, here's the science, here's the logic to it. It is a battle for hearts and minds. And understanding existing ideologies, that is, different people will come in with their way of seeing the world, and we need to be able to understand how people see the world if we're looking for change in how we do things, such as CCF. And following on from that, considered messaging and a narrative is key to being able to promote CCF. And then we finished with it being highlighted that this is an evolving kaupapa that needs to be shaped by the collective and for the long term. Okay, where we're at, so that's the Wānanga series. On the business model side of things, we've started reviewing or looking at where in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and globally, what are the standard approaches to looking at a business model? And when we talk about a business model, it doesn't just apply to a business. It can apply to a not-for-profit organization. It can apply to government, it can apply to a project. It's really saying what are the structure, or what are the pieces that are required to make this successful for the long term. So traditional business model is focused on business, and that's saying, you know, what are the requirements at a high level to make this business successful for the long term, but business models are used in other places as well. So we're looking at what the standard approaches are and also the emerging types of business models. And that's primarily looking and moving from quite siloed, it's all about money, whether it be, you know, financial return or economic return, to actually understanding value in a broader sense. And so the second part of that review is then saying, okay, the types of value or the measures that we're looking at, what type of measures are out there. Then we're moving into assessing these. We're looking at the applicability to New Zealand and CCF in particular of these types of business models. How solid are the measures or the value that's created or the benefits that come from CCF? Do we have solid measures that can be used there? And is the data available? I'm not going to go through all of this, really just to say, in parallel with understanding CCF, we're understanding, you know, where the business model and business cases, the structures that will enable whole of society and investors and government and industry to be able to get in behind it. And so what we will end up with in about 6 weeks' time, hopefully, is an understanding of, you know, what type of CCF business models or approaches are a priority for Aotearoa New Zealand, and where there are business models that can support them, and the measures and the data to be able to support these business models so that we can get traction going forward. And so on the far right there, we have business cases, which is really just a much more detailed business model where you get into the big financial modeling of it. And so if we can, and if there is data, and if there are the structures in place to be able to support it, we hope to have at least one high-level business case. Okay. Over to Lucy.
Yeah, kia ora, everyone. So these are just some high-level key points from the research thus far. So on the business models piece, just recapping what Ian was saying, that in the 21st century, expectations of businesses are shifting away from a solely profit focus to adding in that additional creation of multiple values for people and planet. And you'll see the wee figure on the right-hand side here. This is part of a broader macroeconomic trend of re-embedding our economic system into society and the environment so that our economy is serving people and planet as opposed to people and planet serving the economy. So it's a reversal of our current state economic system. So CCF as a forestry management practice does fit squarely into this trend in terms of its capacity and potential to generate multiple values. So to support the financial sustainability of CCF, there is a need to shift away from the high quantity, low processing orientated business models to business models that are high quality, looking at value added products and looking at how many revenue streams can we layer in. So our research team has identified that this is possible in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and what that requires looking at is expansion into high-value nature-based markets, such as high-value timber processing, carbon, and we also have an emerging bioextractives industry in New Zealand. But also it's really important to step away from that very narrow boundary focus on just the business and actually look at the macro or the whole system. And there's the potential to save huge costs if we look at CCF as a de-risking mechanism. So the cyclones earlier in this year showed us that clearfell plantation forestry can cause significant harm to the environment, to our soils, and also to communities. And linked to that, there's been huge financial loss. So this slide shows some of the high-level barriers and enablers that we have identified in terms of scaling continuous canopy forestry in Aotearoa. So I'll just run through them one by one, starting with barriers. So path dependency has been identified as a significant challenge in this Wānanga series and also the research. So this is simply the preference that New Zealand has historically had for plantation clearfell, meaning that the whole sector knowledge, skills, and infrastructure is set up to support pine. And there's also arguments that this has been exacerbated by incentives from New Zealand's emissions trading scheme. So correspondingly, there is a lack of knowledge, skills, and infrastructure to support CCF, as well as diversification into other species. Financial sustainability. So for the majority, and particularly industry, CCF has not been viewed as financially sustainable, and there's been few seen and communicated clear examples to provide confidence to invest in transition. Market readiness. So there are no or immature markets for alternative species. Also, there are underdeveloped high-value markets with processors being less willing or actually not able to pay a high dollar value for CCF to support that transition. Another challenge is that the full climate benefits of CCF are not accounted for. So our research has shown that our CCF practices relative to plantation practices store significantly more carbon over the long term, but this is not factored into mainstream accounting methodologies or into the carbon markets. Narrow boundary setting and short-termism. So typical decision-making at the moment, cost-benefit analysis and evaluations set very narrow boundaries around value creation as well as short timeframes. And the challenge there is that we are effectively turning a blind eye to some of those wider systems harms and longer-term impacts when we are developing our forestry business models. Foreign direct investment and export orientation. So we, over the past, I guess it's 40 years now, our government has created a policy environment that favours investment, foreign ownership investment in our forests, meaning that a significant percentage of forests are in foreign ownership under a lease-based structure. So that limits it, taking that multi-decade perspective, which is required for CCF, and it also reduces our control over the people of Aotearoa shaping our own forestry sector. On the export orientation, so New Zealand, interestingly, is actually one of the very few countries globally that has no restrictions over its log export. So what that means is most countries protect their industry and wood processing sector by saying a percentage of logs needs to be channeled into export to support the local economy. And what that has meant is that since the 80s, when the New Zealand government deregulated, a whole lot of local mills have really struggled to compete with international prices. And in recent years, that's been inflated by countries overseas having government subsidies on logs, which has driven up prices internationally. So local mills just not being able to compete. And it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation with, essentially we need to expand timber processing, but there's systemic challenges there. So government role to enable markets not to shape. So there's been, again, this kind of ties back into a shift in what the role of government was in the 80s, meaning that governments just enable markets and fix them, that they don't have a role in actively shaping and creating value from them. And that's resulted in a historic lack of strategic thinking and action to support diverse forests which generate multiple values. So aligned capital, that can be looked at as both a barrier and an enabler. Historically, it's definitely been a barrier, but we are starting to see a shift in more investors looking at long-term patient capital, and importantly, also the role of government shifting there and a willingness from government to be investing in this sort of stuff. So small woodlots, so 40% of the total New Zealand harvest in the next decade is going to come from small woodlots. These woodlots don't actually have any supply chains, and they don't have the same path dependency issues as large industry. So there's an opportunity there to identify and engage with these owners to be part of the forestry sector transition. As I said, government role is shifting. So MPI is looking at actively supporting forestry diversification, and Evan from MPI is going to be speaking to that soon. We also have other government departments such as ENVI looking at circular economy and bioeconomy transitions and looking at playing a really active supporting role here. So Māori leadership, Māori are very well positioned to take leadership in piloting CCF and other holistic land use practices, both from like a philosophical standpoint, but also practically speaking, because Māori own about 40% of the land underlying New Zealand's forestry estate. Forestry lease renewals, when these come up, there's an opportunity to reclaim ownership over forestry assets, and raising awareness of the multiple values that CCF does promote has also been identified in the Wānanga series as a real opportunity in terms of building a really clear and coherent and considered narrative around some of the values that CCF can generate, climate resilience being potentially first and foremost.
Great. It was great, Lucy. Thank you very much. I see that there are questions and comments coming through in the chat. Please, if you've got any questions, comments, then keep sending them in. We're going to have a quick run through now. So that's kind of where we've got to with the project. So the three elements. So the Wānanga series is one part. There's the research both into CCF and into business models. And then the third one is Lucy's just taken us through, which is an understanding of what's holding us back, and then where there might be catalytic points or connections or activities that could really help shift the dial on CCF. Okay, so keep putting it in. We will have a Q&A after this next session. I'm going to do one slide, then we're going to be passing over to Evan and Ramona. Okay. So where to from here from this project? We've already talked about at the beginning in terms of these three pieces. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is concluding the desktop research and consolidating the learning from the Wānanga series. So the team, we've recorded, we've taken notes, and there's been a lot of learning that's come from what's been presented. The next thing we'll be doing is we'll be drafting CCF business models for priority forestry species and approaches, forest management approaches where the data exists. We will finalize the identification or the understanding of the systems barriers and enablers, as Lucy's just taken us through, as a prioritizing the barriers and enablers that need to be addressed by not just by government, but by across all the key stakeholders. We will draft a high-level plan for the CCF trials, and once we have these conclusions done, we will draft up these conclusions. And if any of the people who are on this call are keen to feedback on that or review that and feedback before we finalize, we really welcome that. So this, as again, we see this project as supporting existing communities to come together and go faster and bigger and have more ambition. And then just a repeat of action 7.2 in terms of the industry transformation plan, promoting continuous cover forestry. We're finishing this piece, but the next piece, which Evan will talk us through now, that's being picked up by MPI. Evan, over to you.
Kia ora. Thanks for having me, Ian. Just want to acknowledge the hard work of the Connective and Ngā Poatane through all this. It's been some of the most meaningful and interesting work I've done at Tutudako so far. And yeah, also feel very humbled to be here today, given the mana of the speakers over the past several weeks, really. So today I'm going to just speak to you about our Tutudako's diversification program that we're scoping right now. And this was made possible through the Forestry and Wood Processing ITP. And these workshops kind of fall within the scope of that program. Next slide. Cool. So this is how New Zealand public generally sees the forestry quote spectrum in New Zealand. And I think next. This is our opportunity. So there's a really fruitful middle ground between this kind of binary perspective. And we see a lot of space in here, and CCF is just one of those opportunities. Next slide. You might have to hit next a couple of times here. So to just give you a feel of what we see within scope of this diversification program are these, yeah, just right there. These are some of the systems that fall in between these two, in this polarized system. We've got everything from productive CCF models, transition forests, urban forest, non-timber forest products, clear fell models of ukes, cypresses, and redwoods. Like there's just a lot of different systems that New Zealanders aren't familiar with. And this sort of, these systems can enable a lot of the objectives of other community members in regional and other regions. So I love that braided river analogy earlier. None of these circles here that you see there are mutually exclusive either. And yeah, I think this vision is really consistent with what actually the Climate Change Commission, their recent advice is, which is basically integrated objectives for the role of forests. So considering things like emissions, climate adaptation, and treaty principles. Next slide, please. Why? Okay, so there's no silver bullets with extreme weather, biodiversity loss, and market shocks, but yeah, so diversifying our portfolio in itself is important. What does your Sharesies account look like? Is it all in Apple because it's done so well? No, it's you've probably diversified a bit. And I saw this morning that China's ramping up its production forestry by allowing timber companies to have leases on their farmland. So they want to, those are market shocks that are coming down the line. We want to infuse the forest sector with regional community values and support, find common ground and gain support. Unlocking new products and markets is key to transforming the system. And yeah, a forest bioeconomy is really only feasible if we have resilient systems, sustainable forests to support it. Next slide. So this is our vision. This is kind of guiding us as we implement this program. We want a resilient forest estate and resilient localized forestry systems. So what I mean by that is diversity in itself builds resilience by having multiple different systems across the estate, but also we've got stronger forests from something like wind throw or fire, those shocks that are going to come to the system. Regional communities in the sector are collaborative and adaptive with broad social support for forestry. We produce, again, consistent with what Ian was saying, high quality, fit for purpose products from our forests. And our forests provide an intergenerational gift. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the objectives of this specific program. We want to raise investor confidence for forestry system diversity through targeted research, policy certainty, direct advice, investment through some of the levers that we have in government. Develop product and market opportunities, reduce risk from concentration, honor our treaty partnership, and really create social momentum, not just clipping the ticket for social license, but winning hearts and minds and integrating the forest sector with communities and telling that story and allowing the public to participate. Next one, please. How? So yeah, we want to incentivize targeted productive forestry systems, which focus on resilience and community buy-in through policy research, investment, and advice. Next. So these are some of our external partners. This is really in its early stages, but these are kind of the people we want in the room as we build the plane and get it going. And so it's a much wider group of people we want to work with right now compared to, yeah, some other programs in the past. So for example, environmental and geotechnical engineers to engineer these forests so that they're robust, right? Councils, understanding what the values of their base are, and engineering forests to support those values in collaboration with industry. Next slide, please. So these are, you can hit this a few times. These are just some examples of the next steps. This isn't everything, but these are some of this stuff is happening. Some of this stuff we need funding for, but for example, Ramona's working on a national multi-forestry strategy. We've got an import substitution study to look at what our own domestic growers can replace with what we import here. Influencing these all government strategies and plans. It never ends, but we want to help guide that sort of stuff. We've got more ITP actions. Yeah, I'm not going to speak to everything on the page, but this is just an idea of active programs, policies, and initiatives that that could impact and help us achieve that vision. Some of these things are funded, some of them are not. So we can talk offline about that. And next slide. So yeah, how do we keep ambition and progress in this? So the ITP, we can catalyze things through this, but for transformation to really be enduring, it needs to be embraced by the sector. We can't keep, you know, we don't have long-term funding, and things could be different on the other side of this election even. We want to, and yeah, so just for the record, the program in itself isn't completely funded, but we're, you know, I keep this co-papa going right now. So we want to build and maintain a broad coalition with a shared vision. I think Ian, Lucy, Ramona, you're doing a fantastic job with that. Engage with communities, Māori, everyone in the system. Teach them the vocabulary for a non-binary forestry system. So it's not their fault that they don't know what continuous cover forestry is, or all these places in between, right? Or the fact that there's other exotic species besides radiata pine. Help bring people along with that journey. Support forestry trials of the systems you want. We need more exemplary forests. We've got that little bullet there about supporting continuous cover forestry trials. I think there's a lot of people calling for these exemplary forests, so we can actually take people out into the bush, show them how amazing it is. That is so important to me. And then, yeah, focus on the positives. That was consistent with a few of definitely with the Irish there. Avoid adversarial dialogue, find common ground. Ian, are you laughing at how long I'm taking here?
No, I was just laughing at how you said it was important to you, and I was thinking this is probably important to everybody to be. I think
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. And I think that's it. I hope that was in the 8 minutes.
That was brilliant, Evan. Thank you very much.
Cool. So yeah, that's just me on a heli operation in continuous cover forestry with cedar, hemlock, Douglas fir stand. We weren't logging that tree specifically, but agroforestry is within scope. Sorry, I'm seeing all this stuff just popping up. So yeah.
Okay, thank you, Evan. That was brilliant. And so Ramona from Nopātani is going to come on in a second, but just to highlight that the team that's been working on this is our two organizations, but Tane's Tree Trust and Scion as well. So it's a team of 4, and it's a great team.
Yeah. Team effort. Yeah. So we've talked quite a fair bit about Māori throughout this series of Wānanga. And what I wanted to do is just give you an idea of why we're doing that, in particular, how we might be able to use the Māori lens as a disruptor to the current way that we view and potentially practice forestry in Aotearoa. So when we do that, what we might be able to achieve then is probably a more inclusive range of options. We might be able to also look at what is different for the right outcomes, of course. We also might be able to look at what enabling the transition might look like, and areas that have traditionally been marginalized or on the fringes that we might be able to bring into the center. And also what's really important to me is showing what good looks like. Some of these systems and these ways of working haven't been trialed in New Zealand to any great degree. So what we need to be able to do is to show what good looks like, which is why we've put an international contingent into this Wānanga series, so that you could see what good looks like from your desktop. Okay, So the multi-use ngahere proof of concept, if we accept that there's a certain standard and set of criteria currently applied across New Zealand forestry, across the New Zealand forestry model, and that those criteria and standards might need to change to make way for climate resilient forests, for treaty partnership, for intergenerational decision making, for continuous cover forestry, and including its permanent forestry values. Then the next step is to, or certainly for Māori, is to develop the pathway forward from where we are currently to where we want to be, as per my previous presentation. So the multi-use ngahere proof of concept was an exploration into whether all the moving parts that we've discussed, you know, the barriers and the enablers, whether all of those moving parts could be coalesced and reconstituted in a new pathway, in a new vision. And that vision, from the Te Ao Māori worldview, begins with our kinship with Papatuanuku, or the land, and Ngā Atua, or the environment, Te Taiao, to which we are all connected and to which we are all a part of. It focuses on the provisioning carried out by forests on Māori land, but also beyond Māori land. Why Māori land? Because we, Māori, Ngā Pauatane, can't presume that our way is the preferred way for all New Zealand landowners, but certainly its intention is for generic use across Aotearoa. So the de facto standard will be the new set of models through which we hope to transition forest management. I'll repeat that because it's quite a lot. It's quite a deep statement. The de facto standard is the new set of models through which we hope to transition forest management. And this leads to eliminating silos of information at the same time as making more informed decisions. From here, a pilot project will be scoped in the next few months. So we're moving from a proof of concept into the potential for a prototype. And we hope to be able to test the system across a range of scenarios, which include multiple purposes, scales, and systems. And in particular, we will test tikanga informed value chains that hold to Y262 and place-based cooperation. So those are two focuses, but then we also have the broad range of other things that we've discussed inside of the CCF project. So if you want to know more about that, you can go onto the website and take a look at the wider work that Ngā Pauatane has been engaged in the development of a national Māori forestry strategy. And that gives a little bit more of a wider understanding of where we're going to on this journey. Thanks, everyone.
Kia ora, Ramona. Really appreciate that. Okay, team. See, there's a lot that's coming through in the chat, mainly comments and contributions rather than questions. So, as I said at the beginning, we're now into the discussion part of this wānanga. So we'll have circa 15 minutes for questions or comments, and then we're going to have two breakout groups. So the first breakout group will be the task, and so you'll be put into teams. So those who aren't showing your camera, you might have to show your camera so you can engage with people. Your task is within 10 minutes to select one person who will feed back, but as a group come up and identify the top 3 areas to be addressed for the scaling of continuous cover forestry in New Zealand. And then the second breakout group, same again, we put into groups. You have 10 minutes, pick somebody to feed back. And there really to highlight, what do you think? What does your group think is the top 3 benefits or value as we think about, you know, the business model and making the case for Aotearoa New Zealand to move much more forestry to continuous cover? So what are the 3 areas that should be the priority as we look to make that case? Yeah, so I'll give the instruction again when we get to it, but before we do that, then Lucy, is there what's come through in terms of comments or questions?
Yeah, so no real questions have come through thus far, but we do have a lot of interesting comments. So what I think we will do is call on people, perhaps just to elaborate on those. So Rachel Ross, I've got your comment is particularly interesting around some of the concerns around short-term policy making. And that's a real contrast to Europe, as you correctly point out, where the policy and regulations around shaping the forestry sector is set over multiple decades. And here, to quote you, it can be policy can be shifted or like yanked away in relatively short timeframes, which makes it very difficult for you to actually understand the degree of risk that you're taking on if you do transition to CPF forestry. Did you just want to speak to that a little bit further?
Oh,
I think it's a really good point. You should elaborate.
we've been planting for 5 or 6 years. Like, we're very small hectarage. We've probably got about 15 hectares planted in really diverse species that we hope will be high value. So my perspective is also shaped by my interest in a timber merchant business, Mac Black Timber. So I think that for us, engaging in planning and planting a forest that was always intended to be managed under continuous canopy, it's much more risky than I realised when we started out. And that's quite uncomfortable. And it feels, I feel like what we're doing is really important. It's really valuable, and it could be easily replicated on many small scale farms and land holdings around New Zealand. I do feel like small scale forests are perpetually overlooked. And I was really thinking that yesterday, reading about the the new charges that are being levied on participants in the ETS. I'm just like, this is completely outrageous for people like us with what we've got planted. So yeah, it is really discouraging and difficult to keep up with the amount of change and the way that forestry is being treated as a political football. And I find it frustrating and disheartening.
Yeah, that's a really valuable contribution, Rachel. And you might have noticed in the barriers and enablers slide that we did identify small woodlot owners who are planting alternative species or experimenting with CCF as actually a huge opportunity in terms of identifying and understanding like the needs and challenges that small forest owners do face. I'm just wondering, Evan, from a policy perspective and in particular the diversification strategy, if you had any thoughts or comments in response to Rachel's concerns.
Yeah, first of all, Rachel, I hear you. I understand that's tough. I just want to acknowledge that. I find it confusing, and I'm in government. It's it can be challenging. I guess the whole idea with this strategy is that we can start guiding other policies in that space. But there's just so many moving parts, and even stuff that's been long in the train before this mahi, right? So these things take time, and yeah, again, with the political football, like that's very true. And I don't know where things may go, on the other side of the election too. So I don't have an answer for you, but I think the key is to continue having these conversations, and I'm definitely working really hard across MPI and MFE to discuss the benefits of not just CCF, but just diversifying our systems. So yeah.
Right. Thanks, Evan.
Cool.
And Rachel, thank you. It really is good to hear from people who are experiencing it at the coalface.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed. So Yvette, we had a few really good comments from you around how we can support continuous canopy forestry from a financial perspective. I was wondering if you wanted to talk to some of those comments.
Absolutely, thank you for that. Unfortunately, my camera isn't working today, so I can't turn it on. But I guess my experience of continuous cover forestry comes from the US and where we were applying it. And what I would say is, to make it economic, what we really need to do is have multiple markets, so it produces a very high volume of low value products, and we need to have a market to distribute or dispose of those low value products. Those are a byproduct of producing the higher value, but you can't produce high value without producing those low value products. The other part of the system is that they're usually very, very low input systems, so very low cost to produce those wood and outcomes. So I haven't seen a system yet that's been economically successful where it's been planting. They've all used natural regeneration on very low value land with very low management inputs. And so I guess my overall conclusion is just that we have a lot of work to do in the technical space to understand how can we manage these systems to have low inputs and get a sustainable yield through time and a really sustainable production of wood over a long period. Yeah, there's a lot of questions we have on the technical side.
Yeah, thanks heaps for that, Yvette. Those 3 points that you just rose are super important in terms of enabling that financial sustainability of those business models. So Doug McCready, you made the interesting point that a major part of diversifying forestry strategy needs to be recognizing and promoting the diversity and the nuance that is already there in our forestry system. I was wondering if you would like to speak to that briefly.
So it was just a comment that it's been my observation over the past few years that the views on forestry are very different across different regions. And coming from the Central North Island, I'd suggest that some of the stuff, or much of the stuff that was pitched as visionary in your presentation, Evan, is actually already here. And let's not forget the powerful impact of recreation access on social license. In a way, we have a kind of a continuous cover forest already in Waka Forest, which has, some really, really old exotic stands, some parts some native up on Moerangi, and also some normal production, and a massive recreational use and input and social license generation. So my point really is not to is to think about the regions differently in terms of what the start point is for the diversification project, and kind of regionalize the thinking and the strategy relative to the regions. Yeah.
Thanks heaps for that, Doug. So Tim Payne, you made the point that it's extremely important to understand the biology of CCF within the New Zealand ecosystems and also under a changing climate, and you know that there's lots of data gaps there. Do you just want to speak to that briefly?
Yeah, I think it ties in. I liked Evan's slide with all the different types of possible forests in the sort of the middle of the spectrum there, but it ties into being able to get really good foundational data. I mean, with continuous cover, you need to know about species and shading and physiology, and get ideas of growth data and competition and how different stands operate. And these are fairly large gaps that we've got. So putting quite a large effort into that. I had a discussion yesterday, and somebody said, "Oh, but you have to wait a long time for your results." Well, you won't necessarily, because you get early results out if you look at the various important scientific questions and bits and pieces. So I think that's very important, but I'd tie it as well to the extreme importance of getting out there and being able to show people stuff. So, you know, field visits, and you can actually go and see an example, and we're so limited at the moment that being able to put a national network together of long-term demonstrations would be an absolute top priority for me. I mean, in the 50 to 100 years, you know, if we designed one of those networks and got it going, New Zealand will probably thank us for doing so, because you can do all sorts of things on it over time. So that was just, I'm sort of coming from the underlying foundations, I suppose.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Tim. So we've got time for one more question, and Roger May, you kind of build on the point that I was making earlier around, for part of the puzzle pieces to make CCF work as a business model in New Zealand is to understand it as a de-risking mechanism. Did you just want to share some of your thoughts there around measurement? We still have Roger on the call?
Yeah, I'm just.
Yeah. For a while, I've realized that our plantation industry and some of the small owners are not really performing in terms of risk management. And when you look overseas at some of the processes they use over there for planning, harvesting in particular, and ultimately planting as well, is doing a proper risk assessment, a bit more thorough than what we're used to doing under an environmental impact assessment. But most importantly, also matching our mitigation measures to the risks that we identified. And if we were to do that, we would find that alternative higher value species, using those as a mitigation measure, using continuous canopy or shelter wood systems as a mitigation measure. So what we're leaving out of the equation so far are these alternatives that would help to build that spectrum, that dichotomy between conservation and exploitation. So it's pretty simple, really. And I think it's probably, the erosion susceptibility classification is widely recognised as not being fit for purpose. And so we could, if we wanted to, reach into that regulatory framework and improve the risk assessment process. We could start doing that right now. And we could also be better. We need some research on what sort of mitigation measures, the full spectrum of mitigation measures, might be needed to match those risks. That's it, really.
Yeah, thanks, Roger, for that contribution. That's a really interesting observation around some of the differences between decision-making tools and practices that are used internationally, and perhaps consider those wider systems impacts from forestry relative to New Zealand. And I think, yeah, it's such a valuable point that if we did have more holistic decision-making tools and processes, CCF might come out on top.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for being so engaged, and everybody who was offered the opportunity to talk, which was fantastic.